So I picked a piece that brings out the real Litvish, we call Litvish of Reb Yaakov. Sometimes Reb Yaakov could try to fool you that he has a little bit of a Hasidic heart, or he's got like a Simcha Sachayim, which he had, which is always like, Simcha Sachayim is sort of like, kidnapped by the Hasidim. The Litvaks are not supposed to have Simcha Sachayim; they're too serious. But Rabbi Yaakov did have Simcha Sachayim. But every now and then you'll see a piece that really tells you what kind of Litvak Rabbi Yaakov was, and this is one of the pieces. Part of this piece I actually spoke to Reb Yaakov about, and it's in a footnote that the story that Reb Yaakov told me, and I will share with you the way the story went when Reb Yaakov told it over to me, which is very similar, but you get a little bit of a different context because it was me. But let's maybe begin. You have to know, of course, a little bit of Tanach. You don't have to know really the parshanut of a particular kapitel in Tanach, but we all know that Elisha and Eliyahu performed miracles. Okay, and this is something that we really don't find with the Nevi'im before them. If you take someone like Shmuel or Nasan, or let's take Achia Shiloni, the one who prophesied about the splitting of the kingdom. You take these prophets, you don't really find that they performed miracles. Nasan Hanavi certainly not, even though, again, of course, he had prophecy, if you want to call that miraculous, but I'm talking about miracles, where people are watching and something strange happens that is miraculous. You don't find, but all of a sudden, in the period of Eliyahu Navi, and especially in the time of Elisha, he performs according to Chazal, maybe even double the amount of miracles that Eliyahu did. And Reb Yaakov really wants to know why Yirmiyahu gave so much, the writer, in other words, of Sefer Malachim, why gave so many chapters to talk about these miracles. Good evening, Stu.
Shurin?
Oh, yes.
You find anybody else after Eliyahu and Elisha?
Does anyone ask this question, you mean?
No, does anybody else do miracles? Was it just Eliyahu and Elisha out of all of the Nevi'im?
That's a good question. Let me look into that. Maybe I'll have something for you next week. But definitely it stands out over here. Does anyone after that perform miracles? You may be correct. They don't. No, and it could be that Reb Yaakov in his question understands exactly what you're saying, that people didn't do it. It's just, we'll call it this tkufa, this period of time, that all of a sudden the Nevi'im start performing miracles, and you'll see from Reb Yaakov's answer that it makes sense what you're saying, that there were not. Again, like for instance, in the time of Chizkiyahu, there was miraculously the army of the greatest power on earth, the Syrian power, Sancheiriv, just all of a sudden they all die in a plague overnight at the Jerusalem walls. Again, that's performed by God. It's not a miracle by one of the Nevi'im, right? Nevi'im may be saying that, they may be saying that this is going to happen, but that's what Nevi'im are hired for. They're hired to say the future, right? But this is uncommon, and that's why Reb Yaakov asks the question. And he says like this. This is page Kuf Pei Zayin. It's in Sefer 2 of Nevi'im. If you want to just follow in the Sefer, you can. Anyone want to you got the Sefer, Stu? Volume 2, page Kuf Pei Zayin.
I have Aleph, so.
Oh, you have Aleph. That's the hard one to get. That's the one that's really worth money. The 2 is okay. Anyway, Ve'isha achas mishnei b'nei hanavim. there was one woman from the Bnei Nevi'im, and of course she comes to Elisha, and she says to him that her husband was a God-fearing person, and they're gonna actually, they don't have any food, they're gonna die, her and their son, and Elisha performs a miracle for them. Okay, and then further on in this chapter, he stays with the Isha Shunamis. He gives her a child, and then he performs a miracle by resurrecting the child. So Reb Yaakov is he doesn't say this by Eliyahu. He says this by Elisha, but he does talk about Eliyahu as well, because as I said, Elisha seems to even outdo Eliyahu in this. Why did Yirmiyahu set aside, who wrote Sefer Malachim, why did he set aside kama v'chama parshios l'saper achoya le'inyan, a number of parshios to tell, right? That Rashi, in fact, even says over here in chapter Hey Pasuk Aleph, the Rabbi Yosef quotes it, Nisim shenas al yidei Elisha mesader v'holech. Right, he's mesader the Nisim. Right, so Rashi doesn't say why, and that's why Reb Yaakov asks the question. But he says, in other words, Rashi notices that there's bunches of miracles, and he says the Nisim shenas al yidei Elisha mesader v'holech. Rashi, I think, says it a couple of times, actually, in the next few chapters. So much so that it was a matter that the king said to Gehazi, the king of Israel said to Gehazi, tell me all the great things that Elisha did. In other words, it became so outstanding and so well known that Elisha's a miracle worker, right? That the king wanted to hear from Gehazi, who had been Elisha's, today we would call it his Heusbacher, his Meshamesh, right? The one who served him, right? The king wants to hear from Gehazi, tell me all the miracles he did. In other words, the king wanted to be impressed by them. Ayin Sham. גם באליהו הנביא מצינו שהכוסף מוצא לו לרוי לספר הגדולות והמובסים אשר עשה, מה שאין להם שייכות להנהגת האומה. Eliyahu, we also find that he did miracles, and by the way, he did miracles, of course, the one at Hara Carmel, but that was shaykh for the Ummah. So Reb Yaakov says, Ma she'en lahem shaychus l'hanhagas Ummah. There are miracles that were sort of, we call them private miracles. Like the one over here, the Shunamis, the Isha Achas Mishnei Bnei Nevi'im, right? And the same thing with Eliyahu. He has the Isha Tzorfatis that he performs a miracle for her, he makes sure she has food because she's going to die, in a famine, right? And he does Tchias HaMesim on her son, right? So these are personal miracles. I mean, it's great to have a Navi like that. Don't get me wrong. Right, when you need a personal miracle, you go to Navi and he's going to do a miracle for you. That's wonderful. But why does Yirmiyahu tell us about personal miracles? Okay, v'chein birchas kara kemach v'tzapachas ha'ma'ashemen u'bevadai she'eh bezeh kavana miyuchedes. The kad hakemach and the tzapach hashemen, right? That's by Eliyahu Hanavi that he tells her, make me a uga and first out of this, and then the rest will be enough for you to live forever, okay, until the famine is over, and that's what happens. Okay, so Reb Yaakov wants to know over here, really, if it's personal miracles, why do I have to know about it? Okay, that's Reb Yaakov's question here. Okay, he's not questioning, national miracles, but he is questioning personal miracles, because Reb Yaakov Lashita So holds that the Nevi'im has to do with the Jewish people. In other words, the Nevuahs that were needed for generations onward have to do with Jewish people, not with particular people. Okay, so Reb Yaakov gives three answers to this. Reb Yaakov, you'll keep seeing this. Reb Yaakov sits and he writes, and as he's writing, he's thinking, right? And he writes out, right? His first thought, his second thought. Sometimes it's the next one is better than the first one. The third one is better than the second one. He's just thinking out loud with his pen. That's Reb Yaakov. A lot of people who are publishing Sfarim, rewrite and think again. Reb Yaakov didn't think anyone's going to publish this. So he just rewrote. He just wrote what he was thinking at the time. I like to compare it to Rav Gustman, Zochron Levracha, who wrote the Kuntrasei Shiurim, his Svarim he wrote on the different Masechtos, the Yeshivish Masechtos. He sat in the Beis Medrash. I watched him meticulously rewriting again, clarifying again and again. He was writing for publication, and he did a beautiful job. If you ever get a chance to read any of his, his yeshivish stuff, because that's really what he was, a Rosh Yeshiva. So he wrote his shurim down on Kedushin, on Yevamis, on Baba Kama. You'll see they're meticulous and they're organized. And he has at the beginning what he's going to talk about. He has a whole paragraph what he's going to talk about. I mean, and it's lumdish and it's lamdonut. He was a chavrusa of Chaim Shmulevitz, and he was a dayan in the Bezdin of Chaim Moshe. You're talking about the biggest of the big. Right? Whereas Reb Yaakov is sitting and he's writing with his pen, and then in the middle someone comes in and he might not even finish it, or he'll just finish it really quickly. It's a whole different ball game. So of course, sometimes if I heard it for Reb Yaakov, so Reb Yaakov gave it more time, and then I could tell you over. So here comes Reb Yaakov, and he says like this: "Anirali the nevuas elu efshe shehutztuku ledoros." Reb Yaakov is quoting the Gemara in essence, or paraphrasing Gemara Megillah. Shavo Eliyahu levaser al divrei hageula, al dvar, I should say, al dvar hageula. Right? In other words, you need these nevuas because Eliyahu is eventually going to come back. That's in our Navi, right? That's in Malachi. Nei anochi sholech lechem et Eliyahu Navi zecholoto, Eliyahu Navi v'heishav levalos albanu. Right? So Eliyahu is going to be sent back to the world. That is, these mofsim were done now for the future, right? Because he's going to be mavaser the geula, right? And how are we going to know that he's right? Right? How do we know this is a navi that we could trust? So Reb Yaakov says he's already signed on by the mofsim that he did in Sefer Malachim. That's right. Yirmiyahu published them, right? Really, he wouldn't have published them, but since you're sending back Eliyahu, right? So he needs to have a certificate, and he's sure a license. So this is the license. That's Reb Yaakov. But of course, your question is going to be, what about Elisha? He's not coming back so fast, right? So Reb Yaakov here gives you a little bit of a lumdis. ולפיכך סיפר כי מופסי אלישע היו גם כן מכוחו של אליהו. Okay? שמה ויהי נא פי שניים ברוחךו. He asks Eliyahu for double of his spirit. So in other words, whatever Elisha got, he got from Eliyahu. The strength of a mofes, the ability to make a mofes, he got from Eliyahu. וכן מצינו לאל בייס תסבב, ויאמרו נוחה רוח אליהו על אלישע. It says that the spirit of Eliyahu descended on Elisha. See, what do you see? That Elisha's koach hamofti is from Eliyahu, and therefore that's also part of Eliyahu's proof that he is a navi emet. In other words, because that's also from Eliyahu. So we have all these moftim from Eliyahu and Elisha, which comes from the koach of Eliyahu, so that gives him credit also, right? In order to make sure that Mashiach, which is a big thing, of course, we've had a lot of claims to Mashiach, and many of, until now, a lot of them have not been true, right? So what we need is a lot of moftim. That's what Rabbi Yaakov's his first idea. And many of the moftim that were here, the moftim that he did, in other words, Eliyahu did this, Elisha did it similarly to another woman and her son. V'hei ben tzarfit, right? And the Shunamit, right? The Isha Tzarfit and the Isha Shunamit, right? He resurrected their children, right? And that also, they're very similar. So you see that Elisha's power came some way, not only a general power, but even a specific power, like with Simat Elio's types of Mofsim. That's the first answer, which is an interesting answer, not a bad answer. Yesh Loma, she'arich harich al moftei Elisha ki yitochen shemalchei Yisrael lo ikiru betafkid navi ha'uma. And this is another Reb Yaakov, the Shitato, right? That the Moshe Elisha, why was done because the Malchei Yisrael lo ikiru betafkid navi ha'uma. The Malachim, like Achav in the time of Eliyahu, and furthermore in the time of Elisha, right? The Malchei Yisrael didn't recognize that there's a Navi Ha'umah. I told you it's called the minister of religion. Okay, the minister of religion, right? Now, in the time of David HaMelech, right, and Shmuel and Shaul HaMelech, they recognized it. Okay, you had Shaul, and Shmuel was his Navi. And when Shaul did something wrong, Shmuel let him know about it, right? He, in other words, he was the bottom line. The Navi had the connection with Hashem. He had that connection, and he was going to let the Melech know that at the end of the day, I'm the boss, right? Because I'm saying God's word, right? So when Shaul did things wrong, Shmuel let him know about it, whether it was Amalek or the other war, he let him know. The same thing with David, right? David didn't, when Nassan said to David, you're not going to build the Beis HaMikdash. He'll say to him, he could say to him, who asked you? Who do you think you are anyway? But the answer is David didn't say that to him, because David knows that he has a personal Navi to oversee him. Lahavdil, you could call him Jiminy Cricket, right? On his shoulder, right? Telling him, when he did something wrong with Bathsheba, he says to him, don't think I don't know about it. I know about it, and it's a tremendous sin, and you have to do tshuva on it, right? So they didn't want to push out the Navi Shel Ha'umah, right? What Rabbi Yaakov calls Navi Ha'umah, right? Because there were a lot of Nevi'im, right? There was God was a Navi too. God HaChozeh was a Navi. There were Nevi'im that we have that were not Nevi'ei Umah. There were, there was Micha was in Sefer Malachim was a Navi, but he wasn't. He was living at the time of Eliyahu, Elisha, but he wasn't considered the Navi Shel HaMelech. Whereas Reb Yaakov holds that every Melech had a personal Navi, whether he liked it or not. In the case of Malchei Yisrael, they didn't like it. They didn't want to be told. Okay, so that's what he says over here. Ki yitochen shemalchei Yisrael lo ikiru betafkid Navi ha'umah. Acharei imutim shayu im Eliyahu. After the imutim that Achav had with Eliyahu, they constantly are fighting. Once in a while, Achav sees the greatness of Eliyahu, but otherwise, he's trying to kill him. Right? Eliyahu has to go run away because his wife doesn't like him. So he's got to run away because the king and the queen might kill him. Right? So they didn't recognize him, and there was imut. Imut means like fighting. There's a better word than fighting. It means
confrontation.
Confrontation is much better. Yeah, confrontation, and that's what led them to say, "We're not interested in you." And if you remember, a lot of times Achav says Eliyahu can only say bad things about me. When Yehoshaphat asks him to bring Eliyahu, he says, "What do you think? He's going to only say bad things. That's all he does, say bad things about me." Right? Why? Because of this confrontation. Right? Of course, he says a lot of bad things because what Achav was a tzaddik, Izevel was a tzaddik, tzaddikis. right? They were Rishayim. So of course the Novi's going to try to convince them that they're making a mistake. V'lachein tzipor as gedulaso, as gadluso, v'kocho laharosha be'etzem hoyu kfufim elav, v'af im lo hodul bazeh. That's why they told us these miracles, to say that these people were great people, right? And even though they didn't they were kafuf to him, meaning that they were subjects to him, even if they didn't disagree. But now it really makes sense what Reb Yaakov said at the beginning, that there was a king that even wanted to hear the miracles. So you see that the miracles were important for the king to hear in the time of Elisha, in order for him to say, oh yeah, maybe I should put him into my cabinet. Maybe we should be part of the cabinet. Now, Reb Yaakov in the third answer, okay? Reb Yaakov in the third answer, this is a whole approach to Reb Yaakov's hashkafa. It's for the next 2 pages, okay, this answer. And here you're going to see the Litvish Reb Yaakov come out in full bloom, okay? Now, you all know that we have a number of different Sifrei Halacha, we'll call it, on Orach Chaim, right? The most famous is the Mishnah Berurah. Less famous, but no slouch, is the Aruch HaShulchan. And then you have 2 one-volume works, okay? The one they did in Hungary. The one they did in Hungary was the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which became the book for all of Beis Yaakov learning. If you sent your kids to Beis Yaakov, they brought home the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. They never brought home the Litvish Sefer. That was the Hungarian Sefer. The Litvish Sefer, as we all know, is the Chaye Adam on Orach Chaim and the Chachmas Adam on Yeridea. Okay? Now, it's the least popular of the 4 I mentioned, but it's an unbelievable work if you ever get a chance to go through it. And I'll tell you what's good about it. It's because it's 1 volume. And you can go through it. The Hebrew is not as easy as the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, of course, you can get it in English as well. All the potential converts have to go through the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Even though in my family, I would say at least 25% of what he writes there we don't paskin like, at least 25%. Whereas in the Chaya Adam, I would say 95% of what he says we paskin like. By the way, both of them are brought by the Mishnah Berurah from time to time, just so you know. So they've been accepted svarim. They got the haskam of the Chafetz Chaim. I think the Aruch HaShulchan he may quote 1 time. I don't remember. I think he may quote 1 time. That's it. But as far as a Litvish Sefer, that was Vilna. He lived in Vilna, and it may have been a Dayan even in Vilna, and that Sefer really has the Minhagei Lithuania more than anything else. Okay, we can go into the whole Chai Adam is very interesting in his life and everything. By the way, Reb Yaakov's going to say he was a mechutin to the Grummy Vilna. Okay, we're going to see that as well. Okay, Od Yesh Lomar, V'od Yesh Lomar, Sha'arichas B'sipra Movsim Shalisha Bo Lamed Hashkafa Yisodis Shemuter Beles Brela L'Shtamesh B'Kochas Al Tiviyim B'Milchama Al Ha'amuna. The Yisod of Reb Yaakov, Hashkafa Yisodis, that when you don't have a choice, when things are rough, you're allowed to use Kochas Al Tiviyim on a war for Amuna. When you want to prove Amunas Hashem, to have people should have faith in God, and extenuating circumstances, you're allowed to use miracles. That is a litva right there, because in the Hasidic world, it's not b'di'evet, it's mahadrin min mahadrin. In the Sephardic world, it's mahadrin min a mahadrin. Okay, a miracle. Every rabbi, Rabbi Ovadia did at least 3,000, and this rabbi did 4,000, and this, and they knew the future, and they told you when Mashiach is coming, and everything. I mean, in the Sephardic world, miracles are just like up for grabs, right? And when I first came to Eretz Yisrael, and I heard this from Sephardic Rabbanim, I heard them speak on a Friday night, and every story was, he saw this and he did this, and all of a sudden this happened, right? My stomach was turning, not because there's anything wrong with it necessarily, but a Litvak's stomach turns when he hears that. Why? Because of what Reb Yaakov just wrote here, right? He wrote that only Beles Breira, that's a strong word, that you do miracles. Ki b'tkufas Eliyahu v'Elisha, kishisholat Beis Achav, when Beis Achav started becoming very strong, and here we're going to see how Jonathan's question is going to get answered. Why was it only in the time of Eliyahu and Elisha? Palu be'ein mafri nevi habal and the nevi Asherah she'izevel ishto hivia. She imported them. As you know, Izevel was a non-Jewish woman that he married from another country, from another kingdom, right? And she imported her gods. Ad sheyehu benimshi, later on in Melachim Beis, lipsofich risa. It took years and years, probably 50 years altogether, maybe less, 30 years. I don't remember exactly, to get rid of the Avodah Zarah of Asherah and Baal, and the Nevi'ah Baal and Nevi'ah Asherah. It's clear from the text that each one of these Avodah Zarahs had prophets, right? And these prophets were very challenging to the Jewish people. Right? That's the I think it's a modern Israeli term as well. Achizus einayim means when you fool the eyes of the person, like a magician, right? It's
sleight of hand.
What?
It's like sleight of hand.
Sleight of hand, right? In other words, he performs a magical trick, but it's because the hand is quicker than the eye, so he's able to do it, right? B'kishuv v'chadoma. They did kishuv v'chadoma. Okay. Now, before we go on, I'd like to do a footnote. Okay, because we're already getting to the answer, basically, right? You know what? Let's go on. We'll go on and go till the next paragraph, and then we'll go back to something I want to show you. And they, in other words, they used to cause the nation to err. Matim means to toeh, right? To toeh means to err, to get lost, right? Eta'am acharem kiven shemei az umei olam hoyu anaviyim ba'am Yisrael machzikim atzma l'idei nesinas oisu mosef. Because we had a Kabbalah that the Nevi'im in the Jewish nation would become Nevi'im through an oath umofes. That's the way they would prove their nevuah. V'ine kidei laharos shehu novi emet higdil lasos Elisha Yosem nevi'eh habal v'ziu be'etzem hatoras kol hasipurim alol. Elisha at this time felt it, so to speak, hara shah, that he has to show the people who are being fooled by the nevi'eh habal, by the achizas einayim, the fake magic, or maybe it's real magic, but it's magic. It's black magic, or magic from the Far East, right? In order to show them that the Nevi'eh Baal are fools, right? And he's going to do something greater. All the Nevi'eh Baal, all they were able to do, right? They couldn't save the people when there was a need, right? Again, we see by Eliyahu Hanavi and Har Carmel that all of a sudden they lost their powers. Mashenke b'chol amovsim shel Elisha amusoporim kan areu pol Yeshuas altivim lanoshim beis mitzukasam. What's the idea? Even though they're private miracles, but it shows that Elisha can perform miracles for people when they're having problems, when they're in in Tsaris. When the Mitzuka means when they're being, what's the word Mitzuka? It means to be, I forget the word in English.
In a bad state.
What do we say?
Distress. Distress.
Yeah,
Yes, even better, yeah.
Distressed, right? L'dugma beperek hakodim, shemesuper sheyatzu lilachem neged Moav. It tells that they went out to war against Moab, meaning Melech Yisrael, Melech. It says before, a chapter before that, Melech Yisrael, Melech Yehuda went out against Moab. Because the Melech Yisrael went, so probably the Nevi'ah Baal went imatzava. Avalo yechulu tate mayim ulam alidei Elisha noshu. Right, Elisha showed that when the troops need water, you don't call the Nevi'ah Baal, you call the Nevi'ah Emes. Right, so that's why Elisha, of course, there's of course the famous story of Elisha and Naaman, the general of Syria, right, who comes because he's a leper and Elisha cures him. Again, it's really in a sense a private story, but he says to the king, right, don't you know that there's a Navi B'Yisrael, that you're trying to perform all these magical things, right? The king says, how am I going to cure him? And Elisha says, you know the address. How come you don't write us, right? How come you don't write me, right? Because he wants to avoid Elisha, because he's into the Nevi'ah Baal. But when it comes to the bottom line of saving individuals or the klal, Elisha's here. Okay, so that's the important thing, that they wanted to show that even though it was a personal miracle, right? But since these people were b'mitzuka, it's shaykh to the Am, because the Am many times is b'mitzuka, and Elisha could perform miracles for the Am and for individuals as well. Okay, that is the third shot of Reb Yaakov. Why it told us these? I think it's a very nice shot, because it really deals with the idea of the Navi Shel HaMelech, right? The Navi Shel HaMelech was being challenged by the Nevi'ah Baal, so the Navi had to come and say, no, I'm the Navi Shel HaMelech, whether they like it or not. Eliyahu and Elisha said, whether you like it or not, I am the Navi Shel HaMelech, right? Now, there's a story Reb Yosef records on the bottom here. Reb Yaakov told me this story, and I want you to remember this story. It's Hafladik, okay? I'll never forget it. My jaw dropped when I heard this story. I'm going to give you the context why Reb Yaakov told me this story, okay? And it's going to bring out Litvak Shebelitvak in Reb Yaakov, okay? I started getting interested in my early teen years in Jewish history. Now, how was I supposed to read about Jewish history, right? How do you do that, right? So I didn't go to Brandeis, right? There was Koshi began a Judaic Studies department. That's, so there was some books in the library in Brooklyn College, but I had a library near my house on New Lots Avenue, and it was a Brooklyn Public Library, like you all guys remember. I don't know if I could say this about Baruch, because did they have libraries where you lived? Not so much. But Stu and Wayne, I'm sure, know that in every neighborhood where we lived in America, there was a public library, correct? And
absolutely.
And we went there, we took out books. So I went into the Judaic Studies section there. Now, it was a small library, so there was maybe 3 rows of books that had to do with Judaism. And some of them were classics, by the way. But I saw a book that really caught my attention. It was called Lithuanian Hasidus, or Lithuanian Hasidim. Lithuanian Hasidim. Okay, because they never did the CH, they did that, the H. Now, what is Lithuanian Hasidim? Chabad from Lithuania, right? Karlin Stolin is Lithuania. And there's a few others as well. That's all parts of Lithuania, right? That's one of the reasons I could live in Givat Ze'ev, because Karlin Stolin is in Givat Ze'ev. So at least I have like Litvisha Hasidim over here, So, in 586, I came to Reb Yaakov and I said, I started reading a book about Lithuanian Hasidim. And I started telling him what it says in the book. Now, today I don't remember at all what it said in the book, but I told him about Chabad Hasidus, which of course we knew about. The Rebbe was around and everything. And then I told him about Karlin Stolin, and I told him about a few others. I don't remember the names now. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Yaakov looks quite serious, and he tells me the following story that I'm going to read for you. V'siper Rabbeinu shedodo, right? Rabbi Yaakov told that his uncle, now watch this, Reb Yaakov didn't just say a story. He says, my uncle, Reb Gershon, Bandas was his name, Siperlo, Reb Yaakov's uncle told him, She'aviv, that his uncle's father, Reb Yaakov's great uncle, Nochach bebeis HaKnesset HaGadol de Minsk, that he was in the Beis HaKnesset HaGadol in Minsk, B'shah Shadar mitam yeshivas Volozhin. Shadar means it's called a shlucha de Rabbanan. Shadar is shlucha de Rabbanan. It means like a guy who raises funds for yeshivas and stuff like that, right?
A schnorr.
What?
A schnorr.
A schnorr, but I wanted to say it nice, right? Shadar mitam yeshivas Volozhin v'mishpachas Paretsky, his spirit Chaim Volozhina. Okay, meaning he wasn't such a slouch, Wayne, because they asked him to be Maspid, Reb Chaim Volozhin. Okay, and obviously he knew him because he was, like you said, he was the Shadar of Volozhin Yeshiva, right? When Reb Chaim Volozhina passed away, right? So in Minsk they made a hesped for Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim was considered the Gadol Hador. Reb Kivega, Reb Chaim were both considered the Gedolei Hador of that time. So Reb Chaim passed away. Of course, they made a hesped in a number of cities, including Minsk, which was the capital of Belarus, right? And of course, Reb Yaakov's from Belarus. So he says, I heard from my uncle who heard from his father the hesped that the Shadar of Volozhin made on Reb Chaim Volozhin. Being clear to you? Okay? Now watch this hesped. Ukishanamid hamaspid liyad aron hakodesh pascho. You know, where did you make the hesped from? You guys have seen this, right? You get up, from the Aron Kodesh, and the Aron is lying there, right? And you make a hesped. So we asked that the Aron Kodesh be opened up, which we never do, right? V'omar, ani mamed et sefer Torah le'ed, she'eineni omer shum dvar sheker. I opened up the Aron Kodesh to say, I have witness, I'm giving the Torahs in the Aron, our witness, that I'm not going to be saying a sheker here when I tell you this story. V'himshech, he said, and he continued, ani atzmi toshev Volozhin. I am a dweller of Volozhin, right? I'm from Volozhin. Ubitzirasi nispasti lekat. And when I was a young man, I was captured by the kat. What's the kat? What does a kat mean?
A cult.
I mean,
What's he referring to?
Hasidim?
cult.
Hasidus. Okay.
Wow.
When Reb Yaakov told me the story, he said like this. He said that he was, into the kat. But then I'll tell you where he made it clear that it was Hasidus. Okay. V'nedarti mena'ir zman rav. And I left the city for a long time. Why did he leave the city? Because he went to see the Rebbes, right? Vayehi hayom, it was the day. Upagash oti Reb Chaim b'derech Malone, and I met Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim was leaving Volozhin. He left Volozhin, and we met at a hotel by accident, or maybe not such an accident. V'shalani im nechonu hashmua lo tova sheshama. And he asked me, Reb Chaim asked me, is it correct, the shmua the shmua lo tova that he heard about him? Now, the way Reb Yaakov told to me is Reb Chaim saw that he was wearing garb of Hasidim, right? So Reb Chaim said, "Oh my gosh, this is really true," right? I answered him, Yes, it's true. I converted, right? Hitanyen Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim got interested. Wayne, are you liking it? Mara ita bi shazaftani. Why? What? Reb Chaim was the Rav of Volozhin, not just the head of yeshiva. He was the Rav. So he says, "What did you see in me that you left me? What? What? Reb Chaim was pretty chashuv. Kolomar esa chasar matzabo v'anisi dahi sham ro'im v'kam eina ro'im." Okay, you have to know Reb Chaim. There they see, and here we don't see. In other words, the Rebbe see. They're seers, and you guys are not. Klomar, Rosh Hakat Mecholel Moftim, V'Ron Dvarim Shal Tiviyim, V'Ilu Eitzer Reb Chaim Eina came. Right, the head of the Kat, which we know as the Baal Shem Tov, he makes miracles. Right, how many Baal Shem Tov stories you have with miraculous Baal Shem Tov stories? Tremendous ones. Right, V'Ron Dvarim Al Tiviyim. Who saw ever Reb Chaim do a miracle? No way. Okay. When Reb Chaim heard this, he said, Hava, even though it's not right what I'm about to do, but I'll show you also that I see. Omar Reb Chaim, Masha Omar, V'higidli, he told me the following thing. Ro ani achshav b'beisi shebini itzela metapes al kisei v'nofal mimenu upotzei et rosho. I see right now how my son, Itzela, Reb Itzela Volozhiner, right, when he was a little kid, is jumping on the chair, and he falls off, and he gets a cut on his forehead. See him, Reb Chaim. Die. This is enough. Upakarolai, and you will check me. Salabesi umasor, because he knew he's going back to Volozhin. Reb Chaim's left Volozhin. He says, when you get back to Volozhin, go to my house. Umasor drisha shol rabbonis, and go give a dash to Rebbetzin Chaim, right, to the Rebbetzin. Ukvartira kemo b'moinecha, and you'll already see it. Nasati tekel from miyad Volozhina lebeis harav ukeshepotcha rabbanis es hadelet hibateti pnima v'iti et itzalek kishel rosho tachboshet. Right? I open the door and I see Itzala is sitting there with a tachboshet on his rosh. Now I said, Reb Yaakov aired and he says, and don't tell me that he already had the tachboshet before and Reb Chaim was lying, because he asked her, when did the accident happen? Here he doesn't put it in, but Reb Yaakov said he asked her when, because he was curious. So he asked her, and it worked out that Reb Chaim was already gone. He says, he says, all right, when I cross-examined her, I saw that Reb Chaim was great. He actually was able to see it, right? I guess litztofef or litztaref. Litztofef means betzilo. To litztofef means to like push myself in, right? Betzilo in his what do you call it? Sail, his
under his shadow.
Under his shadow, right? Nasisi afilu shadar lamana yeshiva. I was willing to even become the shadar of the yeshiva after I heard this from Reb Chaim, and I saw what Reb Chaim was able to do. I did it. Sayim shadar. Okay, and that's the way he ended the hesped. Unbelievable, no? That's the hesped on Reb Chaim. For Omar Rabbeinu she'afal pi she'omar agrach shelo kasher davar v'hu mipnei the Mishnah of it says one who uses the Keter Torah, right? He could chas v'sholem get a punishment, right? Mikol makom asher Reb Chaim mofes kedei levases et emuna anachona ukamo Elisha. Okay, now you see clearly what it has to do with Elisha, right? It was like we call a Rosh Shah. We have to do miracles. Normally, we don't do miracles. I like Reb Chaim. Now, I'm going to tell you what's funny about this is Reb Yaakov got scared that I'm becoming a chassid.
How? Well, because you study history?
He didn't understand that. I started telling him about Litvische Hasidim.
Oh.
So Reb Yaakov I didn't tell him I'm studying history. I told him I saw a book in the library. Now, I never meant to become a chassid, but Reb Yaakov was so scared that he told me this story.
Rabbi Shurin, what's the if Reb Yaakov was born in Belarus?
Yes, he was born outside of Belarus, meaning a small
How did he
town.
become? But that's more of a Hasidic area, right?
No. It was mostly Litvish.
So but Belarus is kind of far from Lithuania, though.
Yeah, but it's Russia. It's like Belarus, right? But it was very similar in its outlook to Lithuania.
I see. Okay. Very
A lot of like the real Litvish originally started in Belarus in Minsk. So there were Hasidim in all these places. There were Hasidim.
Right, of course.
Even in Lithuanian towns there were Hasidim, but there was a tremendous amount of Litvaks there, there. So Reb Yaakov was born in Dalhinov, which was outside. It was a real Lithuanian city, even though it may have been shaykh to Belarus. It was a real Lithuanian town, I should say, not a city, but it was a town. But that's what Reb Yaakov. Now you see here, before we get on to the next thing, we see here what Reb Yaakov's. They see the Litvak in Reb Yaakov that I'm not interested in miracles, right? And he's going to go on this for the next page and a half. He's going to go crazy on it. Right? Don't tell me about miracles. Miracles are not the way you build your emunah, even though today that's what everybody uses. Right? The miracles of the war. So everybody lists off all the miracles of the war. Right? So I'm not against, it's hard to explain the Air Force goes into Iran and according to, I'm talking about secular sources, not one plane had to go back. Not one plane was knocked down. Now, normally there's a certain percentage of planes that don't make it, not because they're knocked down, because something goes wrong and they have to return, right? There's no question if you check scientifically, and I've heard, I don't remember all the pratim, but if you check scientifically, nobody can believe that it could have been so perfect, right? No matter how much they prepared for it, is what I'm saying, right? Obviously, they prepared for it, right? In fact, the whole thing of the what do you call it, of the Houthis actually helped prepare them for it because it was far away, so it helped them prepare for that. But that's also part of the hashgacha, so to speak, right? But I'm sure you could go through tremendous amount of miracles that and they say like. Israel thought they're going to lose 15,000 people in Tel Aviv. They lost 40, but they did lose 40. In other words, they're going to stress they didn't lose 15,000. But I'm not trying to be cynical, by the way. I'm trying to be real, right? In other words, they lost 40.
October 7th did happen.
Yeah. So again, we have to try to figure out what, you don't even have to try to figure out, but if you want, we could try to figure out what did God want with October 7th, right? I could give you a pshat, but you think I know if I'm right? I'm never going to say that pshat ki'ilu, this is what happened. I'm going to say, laniyastaiti ulai efshar, such a thing. So people are like talking about miracles and miracles, right? It's a really funny thing because a lot of the people who talk about how many miracles there were in these different wars, like with the pagers, right? And again, the pagers are not just what we see. The pagers were like, it was full of science and secrets. It couldn't have happened without pure, like tremendous. I assume I could ask Jonathan, but tremendous people in the high tech world, scientific people. It could not have happened, and the fact that it even happened with all that is a pella. Like, how could it have not gone wrong? I mean, I just can't fathom it.
Right.
How it didn't go wrong, right? So I'm not pining on the people who say this, but why I think it's funny because I hear from yeshiva guys who are against going to the army what kind of miracles happened in the war. And it's always like funny to me, like, oh, you mean God performs miracle for the fry guys? right? That's what he does. So of course they're going to say, because we were sitting and learning on that day when they did the pages, we just made a siyum on Shas, one of our guys, they're going to figure out why, they got such a schluss. But all I'm saying is we don't really know exactly, right? And we shouldn't really be able to say miracles, because they were like everybody's pointing out here, there were things that were not so simple over there that didn't always go right. It's just that, there's something out of the ordinary here. It's hard to deny it. Okay, it's very hard to deny it, right? But Reb Yaakov is saying, don't build your emunah on that. We have a different way of building our emunah, and Reb Yaakov is now going to go on to discuss that. Okay, so he says like this.
Where are you continuing now?
We're on page Kuf Pei Tes. We're not going to finish it today, but I'm hoping next week we'll finish it. And now Reb Yaakov asks on himself a question from the Chaya Adam. Reb Yaakov has to ask a question from a Litvak, right? He can only ask from a Litvak because otherwise nothing really counts, I want to just tell you, I reminded myself, Reb Yaakov was once in a bungalow colony. It may have not been a bungalow. If I'm not remembering correctly, it may have been still in Toronto. They have a place called Bellure in Toronto that people go up like it's the Catskills of Toronto. People go up there for, there's a couple of lakes and there's a lot of wooded areas. I mean, I have to tell you that Canada has wooded areas, right? And lakes, gigantic lakes, besides the fact that they have Niagara Falls, right? So my mother told me that she was sitting at the table and Reb Yaakov didn't sing Zmiris. And Reb Yaakov's wife was very critical of Reb Yaakov. In other words, his whole life she was critical. It's not like just on one about Zmiris. About his learning, she was critical. She was critical about Reb Yaakov. He had the second wife worshipped him, but his first wife, who was a Litvak, right? Not a Polish, a Litvak, and she was the daughter of the Mashgiach of Slobodka. She held Reb Yaakov's Mader. He's modern, and she's like from the old Litvisha, Fruma people, right? So they're sitting at the table, and my mother's sitting there, and she's telling me the story. She says the Reb Yaakov's wife says, Yankel, you see that the Rebbe next door, because the walls are very thin and they're renting like bungalows. The Rebbe singing Zmiros. You don't sing Zmiros, right? Here you see he has his slavas and he sings Zmiros, and we sit in shmuz here by the table. Okay, sometimes different Torah, politics, whatever it may be, but we sit in shmuz, right? And this you see the real koach ruchaniyut that he's singing. So Reb Yaakov says to her, okay, wait. It comes to the time of benching. And the Rebbe says, but Daf benching, right? So they say, okay, you see, they wash my mind. You can hear, wash your equipment. And then all of a sudden they start benching. The benching the Zmiris took an hour and the benching took 3 minutes. So Reb Yaakov says to his wife, you hear how they bench? Now watch how I bench. And Reb Yaakov's benching was an art. It was Pashat watching an artist, right? Every word. You could hear every word. And you could hear Mamash Kavana in the word. You could hear it, right? And obviously Reb Yaakov's Mila'el and Milara was perfect, okay? And then he had certain things in the benching that were a little bit different, right? He left out B'nai Baracham of Yerushalayim, B'nai Yerushalayim. He had like his whole sheet of benching was like, in the first one it says not Kiuzon, right? He had all his different gearses, that he had, and everything you could hear everywhere. It really took Reb Yaakov, I would say, easily 5 to 7 minutes to finish benching. And think about it, you could do benching in 2 or 3 minutes, right? It was really, you can mamish see the kavanah where Reb Yaakov benched, right? And he had a tune to it. There was mamish a tune to his benching, right? So Reb Yaakov says to his wife, "No."
So Rabbi Shurin, I remember you said at your mother's shiva in Efrat, you said that her benching was very long.
Or also, because they all got it. My uncles also, they all got it from Reb Yaakov.
Uh-huh.
Now, for me, I thought that Reb Yaakov did it now because he retired. So I said to my mother, when I knew Reb Yaakov, he was already 80 years old, right? So I said to my mother, well, didn't Reb Yaakov bench quicker when he was young? She said, no, this is the way he benched when he was young. Don't forget, it's a daraisa, man. Via Litvak, a daraisa. We look at benching. Okay, it's important. By Reb Yaakov, it was the first and foremost. It's the only bracha that's probably daraisa. Of course, we got to do it right. That was it. Okay, guys, I will take up the long piece next week, Bezrat Hashem. It's a very interesting piece where he quotes the Chaya Adam at length. Okay, we'll stop here.
Sure. That Rav Yaakov's wife, he said she was the daughter of the Mashgiach of Slobodko. What was the family name?
Heller. I just want to differentiate for you, Wayne. The Manahal Ruchani of Slobodka was the altar. Okay, let's not confuse it. He was the Mashgiach. What does that mean? If the guy wasn't in the yeshiva one day, he asked him where he went. He made sure that the guy had a place where to sleep when he came to Slobodka. The daily stuff, right? He was a tzaddik. He was a tremendous tzaddik, right? But he wasn't like the altar of Slobodka was a philosopher. He was, the king of Musar of that generation.
That Heller, is that the same family as Rav Chaim Heller?
No, absolutely not. Rav Chaim Heller was a whole different ballgame, and Reb Yaakov was one of the biggest chassidim of Reb Chaim Heller. I'm not sure how much of a chassid he was of his father-in-law. I'm not sure. But I have the picture hanging of him and his wife. That's my great-grandfather, right? I have it hanging in my house. But I knew he was a big tzaddik. But my mother told me already that he was a big tzaddik. But I think Reb Yaakov felt he's a bissel too frum. He's a little bit of a frummer. Reb Yaakov was a very, big Baal Halacha, but he wasn't a frummer. This guy was, my mother used to come in. They lived in Slobodka, because my Reb Yaakov was learning in the Kol in Kovna. So they lived in Slobodka, and my mother would go into her grandparents, okay? He would right away take her to the sink to wash her Negelwasser.
Take whom?
He wasn't sure that they washed the Negelwasser in the house.
Oh, gosh.
Am I talking about a frummer or not?
That sure is.
What, he would take your mother to the sink?
Yeah, my mother was, let's say, 4 years old. He would take her to the sink and wash Negelwasser on her. My mother told me. He never trusted that she washed.
So I want to understand. So Slobodka was like a neighborhood in Kovna, or it was like a suburb?
Yeah, it was a little town over the bridge of Kovna. Exactly.
Whereas Kovna was also a suburb of Vilna.
No, it wasn't near Vilna. So Kovna, at one point, the connection between Vilna and Kovna is, at one point, Vilna was the capital of Lithuania, but in my mother's time, my grandfather, Kovna was the capital of Lithuania, not Vilna.
So Kovna and Vilna.
Because Vilna went into Poland, if I'm not mistaken. It got, your borders used to change there every few hours, right? So it went into Poland, and then Kovna became the capital. By the way, I met Russians, secular Russians here in Israel, who told me that they're from Lithuania, because Lithuania became its own country again, and Kaunas is the capital. Kovna is the capital till today.
Right.
So Kovna and Vilna are totally separate cities?
Different. Check on a map. You'll see they're far away.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Okay, take care, guys.
Okay, good night.
Shakayach.